Hello everyone, welcome to a new episode of Weapon Refined Theorycrafting. This time we'll be looking at Jakob, Valter, Gharnef, and Virion. So, well, without further ado, here we go. So, before someone go, why is this so big? First off, that's because of the wonderful new connotation whenever there's an effect like Dagger 7. Because it's an effect that's present on multiple daggers, they just decide to be like, effect Dagger 7 and explain the effect. That takes like 5 lines. But, alright, so this weapon is meant to be working with Corin, or multiple copies of him, or her, in a lot of cases, since the girl actually has a lot of good units, whereas the male Corin has a bow unit that basically loses at everything but defense against Jamke, and even that he doesn't really win by much. And a sword unit that's a support, I guess, as well as a Drift Corin, which Fallen Corin proceeded to take and just pound into the pavement because, you know. So yeah, great situation for male Corin, but still, point is, the way this works is a bit kind of like a solo, but not so much. Essentially, you can only have up to one ally around them. I say one because it does not exclude himself. He counts as one. So meaning, if you have, say, a lance, the second you have an extra one, the effect is off. Honestly, now that I'm looking at it, it should be less than 2, but instead of less than equal, less or equal. That way it's a bit harder to set up, since he can actually have people around him, even if it would be less than 2, if the character is a sword or a dragon unit, which is fairly common nowadays. But yeah, minus that aside, this essentially gives him 3 across the board. In case you haven't realized, Jakob is one of these jack of all trade, master of none type of characters. So, you know, decent def, decent res, okay speed, and okay attack. The problem is that's okay for a dagger unit of Gen 1. Now, if you proceed to give 3 to all stat, that jumps to 32, 34, 28, 27. That bulk is starting to look pretty good, and his offense, well, is looking at 32, 34. It's not ideal, of course, but it's getting somewhere. Obviously, then the dagger effect and so on. Now, the refine is if unit is within 2 space of dragon or sword or dragon ally, grants attack speed defense plus 3 during combat, and unit can counterattack regardless of range. And I just realized I forgot to update Jacob's Stray there. I do have the icon, as you can see, with the icon being present on the unit builder. I seem to have forgotten to add it. Now, the goal is to essentially give him stats in both attack, in every stat, since all of his stats are basically as good as one another. The second you'd have both condition fulfilled, in other words, you know, getting the 6 across the board, his stat line would go from 29, 31, 25, 24 to 35 attack, 37 speed, 31 def, and 30 res. Not bad, and he gets DC. That's why I said the first effect should be less than 2, or, you know, less or equal than 1. Or, you know, I could have worded somewhat differently. Essentially, what this weapon gives him is a open A slot, and obviously close counter even. This is to give him more options. This is also to make his stat line actually work. He's the type of unit that really needs this kind of stat line to work. As for why I basically made so that he needs to be more or less alone outside of sword and dragon units, this is because the way Jakob is in Fates is that he trusts no one but Corin. The reason being, when he was younger, when he was a child, he was abandoned by his parents, and after he was abandoned by his parents, he was picked up by the servants at Nor Castle. So essentially, the idea is that, and obviously Corin was the only one that pushed him forward into becoming the butler he is today. Everyone else was essentially telling him to give up. So that's why he holds Corin as, you know, this person that he would do anything for. So the idea is that outside of Corin, he doesn't want to be around anyone. Makes sense? So as a result, he's just the way he is. He gets more stats by not being with other people because he doesn't hold them in contempt. Well, because he doesn't hold Corin in contempt. So, yeah. Essentially, you can combo this with stuff such as bonus doubler, giving Jakob a lot of options as far as offense goes. Moving on to Valter. Valter doesn't have a Cypher card. Not a single one to this day. I'm kind of surprised, considering he's more or less a fan favorite as far as Sacred Stone goes, villain-wise, of course. But I suppose that's a thing. So I decided to adjust the base effect from 2 attack and 2 speed to 4 attack and 4 speed. This essentially pushes his BST up by 8. Not really his BST as far as score goes, but his BST as far as unit goes. It pushes his BST a bit above a Gen 2 unit, or Gen 3 flyer, since Gen 2 and 3 are basically the same as far as flyer goes. And yeah, I've also increased the damage only to 6 and not 8, because in a lot of cases Fury basically would have just been the same thing but better, because you also get Def and Res for the same amount of recoil. So instead, since he doesn't get Def and Res, I reduced the recoil from 8 to 6. As for the refine, this is a very basic refine, honestly. Probably the most basic of the bunch, especially considering Gharnef. But essentially it's Brazen Spectrum. Valter is the type of unit that can push himself into Brazen fairly easily. So of course, especially if you decide to just run Fury with his weapon, you take 14 recoil. Even at plus 10, that's enough recoil to push yourself in Brazen range, and even Desperation range. So as a result, well, you know, that's 11 across the board with Fury 4. You're looking at 63 attack, 46 speed, 45 def, and 30 res. This is pretty solid. But yeah, since the weapon is basically giving recoil, I decided to give him a Brazen skill, because that just synergizes as well as can be. A lot of people are running Brazen attack speed on Valter, for example, because his attack and speed are frankly piss poor. However, once you add these stats to it, well, those stats don't become too bad anymore, do they? So, yeah, very simple. Moving on to Gharnef. Now, Gharnef, as you can see, the effect is at the start of turn 3, deals 5 damage to non-magic foes within 5 columns centered on unit and inflicts status on those foes, preventing counterattack through their next action. Yeah, let's forget that. Let's forget that it ever happened. So I decided to change the weapon entirely, but keeping the idea in mind. The whole idea of Imulu is to just do a kind of a wave that inflicts the effect that Imulu had in its game, which basically, you know, nullifies damage from all weapons, or rather in the original FE1 and 3, prevents the enemy from attacking Gharnef at all. So instead, this is what I did. So, grant res plus 3, I kept that because removing that would be foolish, especially considering the refund. After combat, if unit attack res minus 7 on target and foes within 2 space of target through their next action. I wasn't dumb when I selected attack and res. His bulk is fairly solid, and I forgot to add the 3 res of Imulu, I'm stupid. But yes, he has 27 def and 26 res. So the idea is that this pushes his bulk to 34-33, sorry, which is not bad, and also pushes his damage to a level that actually hurts somewhat, 51. However, it's also so you can combine this refine with something like Def Smoke and Speed Smoke refine. Not refine, Seal Slot. This type of weapon, if it would ever be added, which I doubt it will, but say it would, the idea behind it is quite simple, really. You debuff everything, and then a certain other unit, namely Matthew or Saizo, comes in, or even Micaiah, and abuse that. So there is a synergy between this type of unit with that other type of unit. That's the idea behind it. Now, the effect of the weapon is Flash. If you don't know what Flash is, it's a staff. It's basically like Candlelight. I do not know really how I should have called it. Anti-counterattack, no counterattack, Flash. I decided to go with Flash. That's what most of the chat were deciding as well. Flash, after combat, if unit attack, inflicts status on target and foes within 2 space of target, preventing counterattack through their next action. So basically I took the idea of the weapon of preventing counterattack, but I've applied this to everyone. I should have, in Inside, made it so this effect would not affect magic foes, because that's a reference to the weapon that can actually take him down, which is the Starlight. Starlight is a staff that, well, not a staff, it's a tome, but as obvious as it is, because, you know, the Imulu description is pointing at it, which isn't the case in the original FE1 and 3, Starlight is the only weapon that's able to just fan through Imulu and allow you to hit Gharnef. This is also a reference to Lind, you know, fighting and defeating the murderer of her dad. So, yeah, the refine itself is a fire sweep effect that works on anything but mages. And this is where the res plus 3 and the fact that you take the attack down by 7 comes in handy. So, essentially the idea is it's a fire sweep weapon that, you know, spreads its fire sweep effect on other units as a status element, and he's safe to do it unless he has to deal with mages. That way he has a weakness, that way he has a strength, that way he has a niche. And before some people go, well, yes, that's broken, you have to realize one thing. Staves have Raffle and Dazzle staff, but they're also colorless. Yes, I do understand Gharnef doesn't basically, you know, have to waste his B slot for Raffle staff, but 1, mages can hit him back. 2, he's red, so he has a clear weakness. 3, 30 attack. Come on, guys. 30 attack is not that great. It jumps to 31 after the first merge, but it's still fairly low. So this effect is more so of a supportive kind, but also if you push his damage to some extent, you can make him somewhat of a nuke against green unit. Against red unit, it depends, because a lot of red unit are too quick for him to do anything against. But honestly, it's mostly a support build that works and synergizes with Matthew, Saizo, and Micaiah, mostly. Moving on to Virion. Virion, loving to boast about absolutely everything, and apparently his statements are accurate. He's a weird character in Fates Awakening. So, obviously cooldown -1, obligatory at this point, because why would you go for speed +3 or effective against some garbage? outside of, you know, flyers, since it's a bow unit. During combat, calculates damage using unit's def instead of unit's res. So essentially, his res stat is non-existent anymore. It's all about his def stat. I've done something similar with Matthew, but instead I made his defense stat his attack stat, plus 14 points, of course. The idea for Matthew was that his damage is subpar, we can push it. Same thing here, but for defense. This way you can actually run close counter and work it pretty consistently. The idea is that you stack on defense to be more bulky, so close counter can be more consistent. For example, you can run attack def bond with close counter, and you get, you know, 31 def and res with buff. That's 37. You get the idea. He doesn't get close counter, however, as a refine, because frankly I've done that way too many times. So instead what I did is that the refine is similar to the untamed knife that Petra has. At start of combat, if unit is within 2 space of a flying ally, reference to Xerxes, and unit's attack speed def is less of that of an ally within 2 space, grants +5 to unit's corresponding stat during combat. Calculates each stat's bonus independently. So if you use Xerxes with this, he will get typically 5 more attack, 5 more defense. The speed will not be there, but you can just, you know, since it doesn't have any restriction for what ally it has to be, just that he has to have a flyer ally near him for the effect to even work, you can have a second unit that actually has a speed stat, push that speed stat of his up by 5. So essentially he ends at 50, 36. And obviously 31 def and res. Which, while his offense doesn't seem that good, once you realize that you can stack brazen attack def, buffers, and so on, it's not that bad. Not that bad at all. So essentially the whole idea is for you to stack on def and to some extent attack. Brazen attack def with close counter, for example, attack tactic and def tactic, is weapon. You're already getting 18 in both, so at that point you have 44 def, 44 res, this is unmerged of course, and 63 attack. Then you can merge on top of this and you become a lot stronger overall. It's quite simple, really. But yeah, I suppose that's all I had to say about Virion. So moving forward, I do want to point out theory crafting like this is very hard for me to do. I've started back school, so obviously I have a lot less time. In fact, I have a grand total of 30 to 40 hours less that I can play with. So with that in mind, working on a video like this is kind of really hard for me. So expect them to be bi-monthly from now on. I think I'm going to try to do 2 units at the end of each month, and then do a 4-unit video on them. I was honestly on the verge of falling asleep when I was working on Virion yesterday, so yeah. Sorry about that, but I just don't have the time or energy to really be working on a new episode with like 5, 6, 7 characters every month anymore. That's kind of what happens when you have 1/4 of your week going away, so I'm sorry about that. Hopefully this was satisfactory though, but yeah. I suppose we'll be seeing each other, I'd say in 2 or 3 days. I'll try to work on the Julia video, though don't expect it to come out like at the perfect time. It's very hard for me to work on these videos now, so please do understand this. And with that said, I suppose there's no more things I can talk about. As per usual, have a nice one, everyone. See ya.